I was looking at everything I would have to write while I'm talking. And then it was there, as if by magic. So dialectic. All right, so we look for behavior things. I mean, yesterday we talked about the idea of that how do we know that they are in the place we are, and how do we attend to that place, and they want to name things, they're asking for those name things, they want to tell stories, they're all the different things looking for. So there's a key to understanding the first signs that they're moving into dialectic. And dialectic, by its very nature, just means that the grammar phrase, remember I said, their brains can't possibly understand anything beyond a one-to-one relationship with different things. They don't see all of the different interconnectedness of things. I mentioned yesterday that I can remember the exact moment that I moved from the grammar phase to the dialectic phase, as far as when I actually went through the developmental stage where all of a sudden my brain was capable of doing things. For most people, it appears to be a much more subtle thing that happens. For me, it was like this weird movie moment, because I was sitting in a room in my classroom and I was at my desk, and I remember sitting there while I was supposed to be doing work that I wasn't doing and thinking, you know, Uncle Jimmy is my mom's brother. So that means Uncle Jimmy and my mom were once like me and Mary Beth and Leslie, which means that Granddaddy was like Dad. And that means my mom was young, like me, at some point, and she probably lied to her parents at some point or another, and she and Uncle Jimmy had fights, and like all of a sudden, as those realities started to hit, everything started to hit me all at once. All of these interconnectedness, and in my head, I know it was like one of those tunnels in the movies where like, ah, and all this stuff was going on. And as I was sitting there, I knew something was happening visibly for people around me, because my teacher said, Jay, are you all right? And I was like, no! I was like, it's too much. It's too many things coming into my head all at once. And so what I realized was that Uncle Jimmy, when I knew, I thought he was my mom's brother, but I realized what that meant, right? Just like Nika looking at the picture of me being young the other day and saying, wait, you guys were really young at one point. That's a for real thing, right? This is just an abstract concept. And there's reality to it. They realize that you're like them, and that you once were like them, and that you are, in some ways, just a grown-up kid. You know, all of these things start to become a reality to them. You're not just mom and dad anymore. All these other roles that you play in the world are real to them. And not just you, that's true of everything about every data point that they know in the world. And now it's multiple connections, multiple realities, multiple possibilities, and they start making connections whether we want them to or not. Yes. And so the first thing that we see, the warning sign that we're moving into that, is we tell them to do something, and what do? They ask, why? Do this! And their whole life they said, sure. And they go and do it. And then one day we say, do this, and they say, why? Why would I do that? What do you want me to do this for? What is the end that you hope to get out of this? Now, your immediate sense of this is going to be disobedience. But that's not what's happening. They're not trying to be disobedient. It just occurred to them for the first time in their lives that there was a lot going on when you ask them to do something. Then there must be other motivations, or there's some end to this, or any other question that they may be happening. And they're trying to figure out why. What is the reason? What's going on? What is happening right now? And so we have to not see it as disobedience, but recognition that they've moved into a place where why questions are important to them. And it's our responsibility, our duty, to now make and create an environment where they are free to ask why questions. Now, we do have rules and structure in our household, like we have literally beaten our kids' heads, but we have made it clear to our kids to understand that when I tell you to do something, your response is twofold. To do it first, and then ask me why I told you to do it after the fact. I would be happy to discuss with you why I've asked you to do this, but only after you first do what you were told to do. Because I don't want to create an environment where I have to have a confab every time I want something done in the house. We can have a meeting later to discuss all of my motivations for the day, but right now, we need to just get some stuff done, and I don't need to have a committee meeting about it. So we have to recognize, though, that that's important to their understanding of the world. They want to understand why, and they're asking for that. They love to ask questions at this point. Not just why, but what and what for and all of these things. It's an important part of their development. And so we have to transition how we teach them to meet these needs. And so the next thing they're going to do, they see similarities and differences, and they make connections even when there aren't good connections. Again, think of those crazy people who see conspiracies everywhere. That's what we're trying to keep our kids from becoming, right? Yes. Not everything is a plot. It was funny, my kids wanted, my daughter suggested this weekend that the perfect Father's Day movie that we could watch together once I got past a deadline for a magazine on an article I was writing would be for the family to sit down and watch Raising Arizona. She wants to watch this movie because she knows that I think it's really funny and that I love it. And so we're watching it, and there's a point where, if you don't know, a kid gets the family, Nicolas Cage and Holly Hunter, actually was the first big movie they were ever in. It was the one movie that made them both well known. And it's ridiculous. It's the Coen brothers. It is just a ridiculous movie. It's absurd in almost every aspect of it. I think it's hysterical. But they kidnap a kid because this one family has 5 kids and they can't have kids, and so they want to have a kid, and that's their answer to it because in their reasoning they have more than they can handle. And when the news is interviewing the guy who's the father of the child who's been kidnapped, and they're asking him a series of questions, everybody in the movie is ridiculous. They ask the father, is there any truth to the rumor that the child was abducted by UFOs? To which his response is, please don't print that, son. If the wife hears that, she'll have no hope. So this idea, this connectedness, you hear that a lot, like UFOs are doing it. They're making connections to things. They can make connections. We have to help them to not make UFO connections. We have to make them to not make crazy connections. We have to guide them to real, honest, good connections. So I'm able to see similarities, able to see differences, and they're analyzing things differently. They're eager to make these connections, and they like to tell what they know. But here's an important thing. They want to talk to you about the things that they know, but they're terrible at talking about them right now. Both of those things are true. When they move to rhetorical stage, when they get a little older, and there's a lot more to that we'll talk about tomorrow, there's a lot to being able to both internalize information and then communicate it well to an audience. They're good at the first part. They're internalizing information. They want to talk, but they're terrible at talking, which is why I have to endure these bizarre stories that my son tells me of things that really, and under normal circumstances, if it was anybody other than my son talking to me about them, I would turn to them and say, What? What makes you think I want to hear about this stuff right now? But he's my son, and so I just listen as he talks. Why? Because he wants to talk to me. And he does, and he got better. The older he gets, the better he gets at carrying on a conversation. But for years, it was just the things that he was thinking about. And some of the things that he was thinking about are interesting, and some of the things he was thinking about bore me to tears because they're just stuff that I'm not interested in. But I don't shut that down because I want him to realize that I value his internal thought life. And sometimes I'll just guide him, and direct him, and all of my kids towards something. Let's talk about this right now. They'll talk about one thing, it's like, let's pivot the conversation. There's something going on in your life right now that's much more interesting than that. And so I have to find out what those things are so that when the time comes to pivot the conversation, I have an easy out. Let's change it to this, because you like to talk about that as well, and I really enjoy listening to you talk about that one more than I do this. So they want to talk. And what's most important, again, what I said earlier, they have questions internally. They're seeking answers. Internally, they're making connections. Whether you know about it or not, it's happening. So your job is to do everything you can to make them safe to ask questions about you and to help them, not about you, but sure about you, around you, but and also to help them to find a good method of evaluating the information that they're trying to evaluate. There's lots of different ways to do this. Go back to the 5 common topics. When they're asking questions, we give them definitions. When they're seeing different similarities, my youngest does this a lot right now, even at 10. She looks around and says, is this like that? Okay, well, I don't immediately answer the question for her. I tell her, well, how do you think they're like each other? What did you notice about the 2 things that were similar that made you ask that question? If there are relevant differences, I don't tell her what they are. I ask her if she sees them first. Is there an obvious way to you that those 2 things are different? Is there something about them? And then guide them through that process of evaluating those things. This is why, by the way, when they get to challenge B, we give them such hardcore logic. because they are moving into this place where they are now capable of thinking in a way that they weren't before. And so what we have to teach them now is that there are rules to thinking. There are rules to the game of thinking, and you need to know them. You need to know the law of non-contradiction. You need to know the law of identity. You need to know the law of excluded middle. You need to understand the rules of inference and the proper way to think towards something. You need to understand the rules of replacement. You need to understand how to do a logical proof to work your way towards something so that you can demonstrate a thing that you know in such a fashion that other people must accept it. You need to know all of these things because there are rules to thinking, and almost everyone you will encounter every day of your life breaks all of them. And almost everything that you hear people say in the world today is utter and complete illogical nonsense. And if you don't know that, you are left victim to it. But if you do know it, then you can dismiss about 95% of the stupid things that people say the second it comes out of their mouth, because you have been taught how to learn how to evaluate claims and to see what makes sense and what doesn't. How do we reason to a position? You need to give them the ground rules right from the outset. This is how you think. This is how we make proper connections. This is how we make wrong connections. This is where they do the fallacy detective. And they learn how people make mistakes while they're talking. You ever want to show your kids fallacies? Turn on like a talk show. Like a news talk show. And just after they've learned a list of fallacies, we're going to spend like 10 minutes watching people argue on TV. And it is going to be like a cornucopia of fallacies. You'll be able to handpick them as they start to come out of these people's mouths. I do that with my kids in Challenge Me. I'm like, I challenge you to go home and to watch any of them. Watch any of them. Watch two people from different sides argue with each other. It is almost as rare as something, as like the most unimaginable being on the planet to see two people have an intelligent conversation on television. It just doesn't really ever happen. At least one of them will say something crazy. Or at least one of them will get upset and start to respond inappropriately. To have two people just reasonably discuss something is so rare that the few times that I see it, I will actually share it with the whole world. It's like, this is how people should talk to each other. This is how we should have conversations when we disagree with each other. This is how it ought to happen right here. Here's two intelligent people listening to each other, responding to what they're saying, and trying to formulate the best arguments they can for the positions they hold. That's not the world that we live in for the most part. And our kids need to understand that. There was a young lady that I had, my first time I ever taught Challenge B. And we had gone through all the different things. And she was a really introverted young lady, but she was awesome. And I just got to have her in Challenge 4 again this last year. And she was awesome still. I love the girl. And she came into us, told me a story. She said, Mr. Watts, the greatest thing happened to me this weekend when she was my Challenge B student. And I said, what happened? And she said, well, I got really sick, and they had to take me to the hospital in emergency. And I said, well, this isn't a great story. And she said, no, it gets better. I'm like, I hope so. It's like, so they have a mask on me, and I'm in the emergency room, and they're working on different things, and all the doctors around me, and the nurses around me, and they're talking about different stuff. And she said, the doctor said something, and then the nurse said something, and then I wish I could remember exactly what it was the nurse said, but I can't remember it to this day. But she said that the nurse said something, to the effect like, it'll work out or it won't. And everybody in the room was like, that's so wise. And my student said, I took the oxygen mask off my face. I sat up and said, that's not wise, that's a tautology. I explained what a tautology was to them, and I put the mask back on and laid down. And she said, and it was awesome. And I was like, see, that is awesome. I'm raising all these little logical monsters, and I'm sitting out in the world to correct the bad reasoning. The parents are so funny when I start to teach the kids logic, because they're like, our dinner has been ruined by my kids working with you. It's like every mistake anybody makes, they're pointing it out. And I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to apologize, because you need to clean up your thinking, man. If your kids are pointing it out to you, then they're just raise your game. That's it. Just raise it up to the level that we're giving them. They are learning to think anyway, so we're going to give them the tools that they need to think well, because that will serve them going forward in this world. That's how we're going to answer what they're going into. Recognize that it's here. And we can do that through not just logic, but all in the other areas. But we can also do it through the way that we deal with them, like personally, right? I remember my son at one point, and we were talking during the break about age-appropriate information and how we let them be exposed to different things. In our household, we are very strong believers in the idea that you cannot shelter them from the influences of the world. And so we want to be there with them as they process the world around them as much as we possibly can. And we do things like if we give them a book to read and we know that this book might have themes in it that we're a little bit concerned about how they're processing, we don't just leave them to read it on their own. What we do is we'll put notes in books, or we'll say, where are you in the book? When you get to this chapter and you've read that chapter, you come and talk to us immediately after. We want to know what you're thinking about as you read it. When they watch a movie, when it's over, we'll turn it off and we'll say, what do you think about what you just saw? Let's discuss what just happened, discuss the different aspects of it. Sometimes, you have a very short conversation. Sometimes you have a very meaningful conversation. One particular time, we had our car blow up and do the dumbest conversation imaginable after our kids had seen Doctor Strange, and a fight broke out where if a multiverse existed, where all possibilities, an infinite number of possibilities were real, then there was a universe where the Marvel heroes were real. And it was so crazy to listen to my children argue about this because my 9-year-old had the strongest feeling about it. And man, she would not let it go. And she was arguing at a very high level. And it just blew up. And I'm like calling friends of mine saying, my kids are arguing about the multiverse right now. And it's a meaningful argument, right? And they understand it enough to be able to have a knockdown drag out about it at a high philosophical level. But you have those moments, but also we'll actually give our kids a little extra. And your kids will love that. My son came to me one time, and he had just seen Finding Forrester. I watched it with him. I love Finding Forrester, and I said, I want you to watch this movie. It'll expose you to a lot of different things. The language in it can be atrocious at certain times. But it's a movie that I think is great. If you haven't seen it, it's about a young man who lives in the projects, who's incredibly gifted as a literary student, even at the high school level. And he gets a scholarship to go to an exclusive New York private school. And at the same time, he meets this hermit in his neighborhood who turns out to be one of the most famous authors in American history, who is hiding out in this home because of just trauma in his past. He has no interest in having a relationship with anybody. It is a fantastic movie. I love the movie. If you can get past the language, it doesn't bother you. There's just elements or themes to it that are interesting. So my son watched it, and he'd also just recently seen Ratatouille, and he'd just recently seen The Incredibles. And so he got done watching that. He and I were talking about things, and I noticed he wasn't seeing certain connections, right? And so I asked him, I said, do you see anything connecting the themes of The Incredibles, Ratatouille, and Finding Forrester? And he said, I don't see anything obvious. I said, okay, well, here's a little assignment for you. Next week, you're going to tell me the uniting theme between those things. I want to see if you can figure it out. You just have to come talk to me about it. Just consider an oral exam in the household that we'll have about this. And so he got frustrated because I threw more work on him. And he was going and talking to his mom, and he was saying, what does Dad want from me here? And she was saying, he wants you to see the connection between these three. And she helped him to try to guide him to it, but it was frustrating. And I think it said the day before, he went back to her again and said, I don't understand what he wants. And so she talks back and forth with him. And then she says, right in the middle of it, he's like, I got it. I figured it out. And so the next day, I was sitting working on something, and my son walked in. He said, I think I know the unifying principle between the themes of Ratatouille, The Incredibles, and Finding Forrester. I said, okay, what are they? And he said, all three of them are about the struggles of gifted individuals to express themselves and their talent in a culture and a community that in some level or another rejects the way that they are. So all three of them are about the drama or plight of somebody who does something exceptionally well, trying to find a way to live meaningfully and express that in the world around them. You're absolutely right.
Awesome.
So as a matter of fact, Brad Bird, who made both The Incredibles and Ratatouille, that's almost all his movies are about. If you look at Iron Giant, you look at Incredibles, you look at Ratatouille, you look at Incredibles 2, you look at Tomorrowland, look at any Brad Bird movie that he's ever made, at some level or another, the central focus of it is how do gifted people express themselves or work out their gifts in the culture around them. It was helping him by giving him things where there was, in my mind, an obvious connection and saying, find that connection on your own. I want to see that you're capable of doing it. My daughter did it on a lesser level one time. She came to me and she said, I really would like to give Valentine's gifts to the rest of the people in my class. She came to me because she knew two things. Number one, however cheap they were, I was going to have to take her to the store to buy those stupid Valentines. And number two, she knows I think Valentine's Day is dumb. And so she comes to me and asks me if she can do it. I said, okay, look, I'll cut you a deal. You go do that. I will take you to go do it if you can tell me why Valentine's Day exists. And so she went away, and she actually ended up doing a little research paper on it and brought it back to me that night about St. Valentine and who he was and what he was purported to do and what he did in his life and how this whole thing came to be something that was celebrated. And not only did she give that to me, but when she gave it to me, she's like, St. Valentine was a really cool story. And I really enjoyed knowing it. And I'm glad that I know it now. We have what we call the Ben Franklin rule in our house. If you've never read Ben Franklin's autobiography, Benjamin Franklin says, I have endeavored in my life to never ask somebody a question that I have not at some point or another exhausted my own efforts to find the answer without them. And so my kids come to me and they ask me something and I say, that's a great question. What have you done to find the answer before you came to me? Because I want to know how important this information is to you. Is this just something you're casually interested in as a passing question? And if it is, I don't really need to stop everything I'm doing to answer it for you. Or is it something you're genuinely interested in which case I can help you find the path to the resources to answer the question for you. I don't want to just give you answers. I want to give you the ability to, when curiosity strikes you in your life, you can go find them on your own. Now, I'm willing to guide you in that path, but it's not my job to just tell you the answer to everything that you ask for. To do that would be to violate the Benjamin Franklin principle, which I think is a great rule to live your life by. First, find the answer yourself before you go. I work with scholars. I had one scholar and I were talking, and he said, Jay, I find it amazing that you and I don't talk to each other personally more. Why don't you ever ask me questions like everybody else does? And I told him, you've written books. You've written articles. Why would I ask you? But you've already published all the answers. If I have a question, I go get that stuff. Why would I bother you? I assume you want to do other things with your life than answer my questions that you've already answered in writing. We can find those answers, and we can train our kids to do it. And so you do it in logic. We try to teach them a way to search out a way to make those connections. There's proper connections, to see the relationships between different things. We can do it in literature as they're reading, having conversations with them about what they've read. Being purposeful about what they're reading, which we are in Challenge B. They're not just unconnected stories that we're giving to them. Every story in the book that they're reading has a theme, and that theme extends across the entire year. And we talked about that idea of taking ownership of your education. It's time for you to own it. Challenge B is hard. Challenge A is hard for kids that haven't been in Challenge. Challenge B is harder than Challenge A. As a matter of fact, it grows until you get to Challenge 2. Then 3 and 4 are not quite as intense as Challenge 2 is as far as the amount of things they have to take. The reason that it's hard is because they have to learn to be disciplined about how they pursue their education. My son was overwhelmed by the work. Not the level that he was being asked to operate at, but the work. And we had to show him a way to handle his day. I said, look, your problem is you get fixated on one thing. So here is a day, 1 hour. Here, you do this. At the end of that hour, you move on to the next subject. At the end of that hour, you move on to the next subject. I don't care if you're mid-math problem, you move on. You are not spending 3 hours struggling with math today. There's too much to do. And we worked his way through. We showed him a schedule. And he did it, and he started finishing his work faster, better, more efficiently. By the time the end of the week came, he wasn't rushing to get things done right before we went to the group on Monday. But then he messed up and went back to his old ways. And he was the one that came to us and said, I messed up. Now my schedule's all messed up. When I do it right, it's easy. I can handle it. When I do it wrong, it's overwhelming. And I just get too far behind. I got to get back. We talk about things when I talk to groups at the beginning of the year. I talk about knowing the difference between big rocks and little rocks. If you talk about a jar, we have a bunch of, like a big barrel. We've got a bunch of big rocks, smaller rocks, sand, and water. If you want to get all of that stuff in there, you put the big rocks in first. You put the smaller rocks in, they'll fill in the holes around it. You put the sand in after that, it'll fill in all the area around that. And then you pour the water on top of it. If you violate that principle at all, you will never get all that stuff in there. And so my kids, all the kids I have ever worked with, can talk to me in that language. When I ask the question at the beginning of every week, what's your big rock this week? What is the thing that's going to consume your most energy, your most time, your most investment? Identify it, because that's the thing that we have to make priority about how we deal with it this week. And then everything else, we work around the big rocks. They have to learn to be disciplined. They have to learn to control themselves. They have to take ownership of their education because, as I said, they can't inherit your faith. They can't inherit your knowledge. They have to learn to do it themselves. And they will. By the time they get to challenge 2, I'm going to get to board slam in a second here. By the time they get to challenge 2, I was talking to a guy at a national meeting, and he said that she was telling me that this father had come home and seen that the workload that his challenge 2 daughter had, and he freaked out and went to the mom. And he's like, I cannot believe how much work you have put on my daughter and that you've allowed this to happen. And while he was freaking out, the daughter walked in the room and said, Dad, what is wrong? He said, this is ridiculous. You should never have to do this much work. And she told him, I've been doing this for years. I know how to handle this. I have a plan, and I'm doing it. This isn't that big a deal to me. You need to relax and let me handle it. He saw what she was doing. He said, this is ridiculous. But he didn't realize he had a challenge 2 daughter that had been forged in the crucible of A, B, and 1. And she understood exactly how to handle the schedule that she was given. And she was doing it herself. And didn't need people to freak out to support her and to run around and hold her hand at that point. They have to become disciplined. And at the exact time that they move to that place, then we change the way that we teach them. Things get more sophisticated. We make them see other things. We introduce them into other areas of thought. We get them thinking about things that not just that we agree with, but things that we disagree with. We expose them to material that says things that we don't like. Intentionally. So that they'll learn to think about those things. And they'll be aware of the existence of those things. We get them at one level. Is it 2 or 1 that you do, Douglas and Washington, Tracy, talk to me. Booker T. Washington, is that 2 or 1? 2, okay.
No, 1.
That's 1, challenge 1, right? So you get Frederick Douglass and Booker T. Washington, 2 people who were like back-to-back in history, but because they're 2 brilliant men who approach things differently in the way they process the information around them. They both had to deal in some level or another with the evil of slavery, but they both dealt with it somewhat differently in the way that they did it. And so the 2 students are exposed to both of their thought processes so they can see how 2 brilliant men who accomplished great things saw some things differently and dealt with things differently. And why? What was the difference in the context between Frederick Douglass, who freed himself from slavery and became a powerful voice for abolition and one of the greatest American citizens of all time, and Booker T. Washington, who most of his was post-slavery and the Reconstruction, and how that may have influenced the way that the 2 voices worked in the world in which they operated. They're exposed to all these different things. They can think about circumstances, context, relationship, information, and recognize that the difference between one-to-one and they're going to be taught how to process different ideas and make sense of them. Now, this is a math dialectic, and this will be the last thing we do before we go to break. This is the thing. This is called board slam. How many people are familiar with board slam? All right, great. So we should be able to play it. I'll tell you what happened last week. Last week when I started playing board slam with the audience, we had a group that was coming in to do a presentation, and they were young students. And as they walked into the room, you don't like board slam? I'm just kidding. As they walked into the room, the students started raising their hand and answering all the questions, and the parents let them. All the adults just sat back while the students crushed it. Okay, board slam, what we'll do is we'll pick 3 random numbers. We'll do 2, 5, and 6, right? So here's how it works. You have to use the operations addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, or exponents, all 3 numbers, 2, 5, and 6, to get an answer 1 through 36, one of those answers, right? So, anybody familiar with it? Want to say, 13. Oh.
What?
6 plus 5 plus 2 is 13? All right.
36.
15, wait.
15, how did I do that? 6 times 5 divided by 2.
Good job.
15. All right, next. Yeah. 1.
6 times 5 times 2 to the 0 power.
All right. We got somebody finally using 2 to the 0 power. There we go.
3?
Yes.
36.
36.
6 squared is 36 times 5 to the 0 power times 2 to the 0 power.
There we go. In the back.
Wow.
Yep.
16. All right.
You have to use all 3. Is that the rule?
Yeah.
33. All right. Very good. Yeah, you have to do the whole problem for me. I'm not. Yes. 32.
5 times 6 plus 2.
6 plus 2. 32. Yes. plus 5 is 29, actually. All right, we'll do 29, yeah.
28. 28.
28.
6 times 5 minus 6.
Very good, 28.
That'd be a simple one.
All right, so when we do this with the classroom, which is one of the goals, one of the things we do in math, I actually will, like, if it's Peyton, if he gets it right, I'll put a P over it. Or if Josh gets it right, we'll put J over it. And so that way it's a competition. Who can get the most as fast as they can. And this is a dialectic exercise. Why? Because they have the definition of numbers. They know what 2, 5, and 6 are. They know what the different operations are. But what they have to do is look up here and be able to immediately see how to use all those things in different ways to get different solutions. So it's not just a one-to-one relationship with the information. It's actually using all that information they have in a new way. And you just start all over. Put it back up there and take 3 different numbers and start all over again. This is how you move into dialectic on a basic way. And what was fascinating about what happened last week when those kids came in, it wasn't just that the parents stopped, which I thought was funny, because the kids were actually being brought in, and it all started because one young girl, as she was walking in, and the parents were raising their hand, she raised her hand. And because I don't discriminate against kids, I told her, yeah, sure, go ahead and answer. And she answered. And then, man, they were competitive. They were going, and only one kid made a mistake one time. And he argued with me for about a second. He's like, there's no such thing as the 0 power. We don't say that. I was like, yeah, we do. Mm-hmm. And so we had to have a discussion about that. But they went through that board so fast because they were enjoying it. They were having fun. So it's both a departure from normal math, where they're just working on their problems, and we do this with the group, do games like this, but it's also dialectic by its very nature, because it's requiring them to use the grounding, the foundation of information they have to do new things with it, to find different solutions. Normally in math, we have them come in and they work on some problem that they've had during the course of the week. They do it in front of the board. With my more advanced students that are working on things that other kids may not understand, what I'll do is I'll say, your responsibility is to teach it to the class. I'm going to help you to start this to get to rhetorical phase. You need to understand and that's a hard challenge for them because they understand some advanced math, but as they're writing on the board, I'll tell them you skipped a step. I'm like, well, it's not that. It's not important to you, but it's important to this class. Because you know it in your head, but they don't, and they need to see it. They need to walk around. Even if they can't understand it fully, what we're giving them is what we call exposure. They're seeing it, so that when they see it again later. With kids, sometimes we have kids that are behind in math for various reasons. But what we do with them is that they bring in, what I do with them is when they bring in their problem, I let them race. Because I give all of my kids a little whiteboard, and so they get excited about bringing in some problem they've been working on, like I got a good problem to race with, and they write it up on the board, and all the kids have their markers sitting down and their hands up, and I say, go, and they grab their marker and start working on the problem, and then they have to hold it up for me, hold it up for that student, to show that student the solution they got, so that student can declare a winner in the round. And so you have different ways of them expressing where they are mathematically and showing it, and then we have games like this, and all of this is to meet them where they are. It's beyond just, at that point, grammar. It's their ability to use their information to come up with new ideas, new solutions, new pathways to the same information over and over again. It's a powerful tool. All right, we're getting ready to be done. So here's something for me for the day. So here's 2 things I want to leave you with before I walk out today. Number 1 is because I like to encourage people to actually show up on the 3rd day and to show up marginally on time, because I know how homeschoolers are. Like every day we give ourselves a little more grace, right? You're like, they don't really need me to show up that early. That's just who we are, right? I mean, if we went one more day, we'd all show up in pajamas probably. So here's tomorrow. When I get here first thing, I'm going to put a riddle on this board. It is a riddle intended for you to come in, and you are not going to have time to consider the riddle at any great length unless you get here early enough to see it early so that you have it written down, because we'll talk about the riddle the first thing when we go into the second part of the morning. So we'll start the second part of the morning addressing the riddle. I like riddles for multiple reasons, but riddles are by their very nature dialectic. The riddle that I'm using tomorrow actually also feeds into the rhetorical discussion. What do I mean by their dialectic? They require us sometimes to think of things in different ways. For example, let's do a quick riddle right now. When is 4 half of 9? When is 4 half of 9?
After 9 subtracted by 1.
Say that again?
After 9 is subtracted by 1.
But then that's just half of 8. 4 is half of 9 in one particular circumstance. When is 4 half of 9? Yes?
When you cut off the top of the
When you, so you're saying, like, if I draw 9 and then go like this?
Yeah.
Close. I thought you had it at first, but that's kind of like a weird why. But you're thinking right.
Is it when you include 0?
No.
Oh.
It's a good try. Okay, you're going to be bothered by the answer, I know. Everybody usually gets mad when I actually show the answer. Okay, so...
Pretty cool.
It's a Roman numeral. Cut in half. There's 4 right there.
That's cool.
It's half of 9.
That's great.
Why is that dialectic? Because you have to think about it a different way. You're thinking of it purely in one way, a straight division problem. But riddles, by their very nature, feast on verbal ambiguity. They require you to think differently. You could also, I could have asked you, when is 4 half of 5? And because if I do 5 like that, and get rid of those 2 letters, I got 4 left over as well. Either one of those demonstrates that the way that a riddle works is it feasts on verbal ambiguity. So it's dialectic by its very nature. It requires you to listen and to try to find some way that the words that were offered to you work in a different context for you to get the answer to the riddle. It is frustrating when somebody gives you the answer to the riddle, because had you only thought about it that way, it would have been obvious, and it irritates you that you didn't. But it's the truth. That's how they work. The riddle tomorrow will have a different build, a different way. But this is to show you, riddles themselves are things that we can work to help the dialectic kid. Puzzles, huh?
Dad jokes.
Dad jokes, yeah. Anything. Puns. My wife loves puns. It's a weird thing in the apologetics community in which I work. Some of these like world famous and beloved apologists are obsessed with puns. And so if you get around them, you get one of their email exchanges or a private message exchange or even sometime a comment thread on Facebook, they will go on forever. It's like, how do you have time to do this? You're supposed to be giving a talk somewhere this afternoon. But they just keep pun after pun after pun because they love the idea of being able to twist phrases that way. But all of these things are things that you can use to help a dialectic kid. Remember we talked about yesterday, to make learning fun, to love learning, to engage them where they are. It's where their brain is. They love this kind of stuff. The more you can give it to them, the more they just eat it up. You can get whole books of puzzles, and we'll just give them this stuff. The Moscow book of puzzles is an interesting one that has a lot of math and a lot of puzzles, and we bought that because a young lady in our community had it, and we just give it to our kids, and they'll start working through it and looking at different problems and figuring out how to get the answers. I have a little Mensa book of puzzles that I get out, and they'll look through and see if they can figure out the answers to them. They just love riddles and puzzles because they're requiring them to think in new and different ways, or to take advantage of verbal ambiguity. Yes?
What was the word that somebody said started with a T? It's another kind of dialectic puzzle or something. Somebody up there said.
She said dad jokes.
Yeah,
Dad jokes are puns.
Dad jokes.
Yeah, bad jokes or dad jokes are basically the same. It's just the thing that we like to say stuff. But it usually has to do with funny stuff, like puns and things like that. But it is often plays on words.
They did research on dad jokes, and they said the reason that dads do dad jokes is because it helps them gain a connection with their kids. Even though it's silly.
It is silly. But it's fun, too. The other thing I'll tell audiences, I'll tell you really quickly, supposed to get off here. The one thing that all children who grew up, if you ask adult children what it was that I did with my dad, that explains why an adult child had a great relationship with their father versus adult children that said have a negative relationship with their father. This is great information for you to pass on to husbands. No matter what else you did, the people who said all these other things they had different, but there was one thing that was shared almost universally between adult children that said they had a great relationship with their father. They said their father was active in the last 20 minutes of their day. Right before they went to bed, their dad read them stories, prayed with them, talked to them. That their father was always there at the end of the day to spend that last few minutes with them and check with them. Every single adult child who said they had a great relationship with their father, no matter whatever else was different, that was almost universally shared. And that's a great thing to be able to tell a dad who's struggling with what he's doing with his kids right now. Say, you can be a complete moron for 24 hours of the day, almost. As long as you get that last 20 minutes right, you're going to be okay, and they're going to remember you fondly. Just sit next to them, read to them, pray to them, pray with them, read books to them, talk to them about their day. Spend those last few moments. It's just meaningful to them in a special way. That has actually nothing to do with the dialectic stuff. That's just something as a father I like to share with people because it's very important to me that I'm there at the end of my kid's day. Yes?
This is totally off subject.
Yeah.
It's going back to board slam. So I have a kiddo who just finished kindergarten. So he kind of knows his skip counting for the most part, but not totally good. Do you think introducing something like that is too early at that age, or
I'm looking at you. What do you think? Do you think board slam's too early for a kid coming out of kindergarten?
You can modify your operations probably, and you're gonna wanna help them.
Right.
Yeah, I would pull the exponents for sure,
But like addition, subtraction, you could just kind of leave it at that, really.
yeah, you could, and for the young child, you could even let them have access to something that shows them their multiplication tables. If they're too young to know those yet, because they still have to make the connection, because it's not just two numbers they have to work with, it's three, but, yeah, I would think.
So they have the times tables in front of them, so you're not operating with something that they may not have memorized, but they can look at it and see what they can do. Multiple division and times tables in front of them right there. Okay, turning it over. Yes.